slide, please. Thank you again for joining us for this webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Institute on Disability and Human Development and the Leadership, Education, and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities Program, LEND, and both the UIC's Department on Disability and Human Development, as well as the Autism Program of Illinois, TAP. Funding is provided in part by the Autism Program of Illinois and the Illinois Department of Human Services. We are really excited to have great presenters with us today to share about this important topic. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Dixon.
Thank you, and for joining us today, and to hopefully learn a little bit more about reducing challenging behavior and promoting mindfulness in the individuals that we work with, maybe even in ourselves. I don't know about you, but I've got a few challenging to be reduced. Next slide, please. So the hype is real. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it seems as if there's more and more behavior problems all around us. And if you look into the scientific research as to, is it just your casual observation that's noticing more challenges, or is there something really going on? It does appear that, like, in the last decade, there's been kind of like a doubling of the number of kids that are being reported through, oftentimes school systems or maybe social service agencies that have significant challenging behavior. Now, why that is the case is kind of a big question. Everybody's got ideas. They range from, there's too much screen time. People are not paying attention to the world around them. They're trapped on, Facebook and Twitter and playing video games, and our families are more dysfunctional than ever. COVID hasn't helped. Being around my family nonstop has, I think, led to some challenging behavior for me. So there's a lot of ideas, I guess, as to like what's causing this. Is it cell phone radiation? And that the real solutions are going to be found as we look to science. And some of the things that are out there, honestly, are pretty wild. They're pretty unsupported and might kind of fall into that category of fake news or fake science. Next slide. But this idea of, the quick fix and the cause and the solution for behavior problems isn't something that's new to our current culture, but rather, we've seen gimmicks like this for about 100 years. This image you see on the screen is an example of one of those things from years gone by, which was a magnetic belt that could be worn around you. And it would pretty much cure everything that was wrong. It would cure behavior episodes, sleeping problems, fertility issues, other health concerns. I mean, it was fantastic. And what it claimed, unfortunately, it wasn't fantastic in what it really did, which was absolutely nothing. And so, the snake oil, identification of the causes and the solutions has been with us for a long time. I don't know how many of you have tried dieting, but they most times don't work. We have a variety of options, such as, low carbs, high protein, no meat, vegan. There's a million different ways that this obesity disaster that we have in our country is being pitched towards us, with ways to fix it. But unfortunately, the real way that works is, diet and exercise, and it's healthy eating, not just a random kind of miracle diet. And who, I don't know about you, but who really wants to do any exercising? Now, if you look online and you just type in, behavior problems, or, why do kids have problems with behavior. How do we fix them? And you get millions and millions of hits. And the problem with all those hits is that it's really hard to figure out what is the truth and what is the junk there. And how does somebody, working or living with people with significant challenging behaviors, kind of separate the truth from the lies and the myths? Well, the problem for us is that we want it all, and we want it all fixed right away. I mean, geez, look at Parent Magazine here. The 1 week fix for bad behavior. If it was just that easy, well, I'm guessing that we wouldn't have 180 people sign up today. Now, that next image that you see there is one of those miracle cures that has been oftentimes hyped for persons with autism and related conditions, and that is dolphin therapy. So that's right, dolphin therapy. For only $10, you too can take your child to a swimming pool down in Florida and have that child swim with some dolphins. And the dolphins will do some sort of magical, chatter with their dolphin conversations and help, soothe your child and ease the severity of the disability. Now, while that sounds silly, and it is, I mean, it's a tragic example of people trying to take advantage of the vulnerable financially and promise things that have no rooted basis in science. Now, the thing that happens is that you may chase after a treatment such as this or many others, and invest money and time, and then look and see. You keep looking and trying to find, well, maybe, it was a good day today. I bet it was the intervention we just did. Oh, it was the money we spent. I told you it was going to be worth it. And so, there's this big difference between correlation and causation. With respect to dolphin treatment, obviously getting out of the winter cold of the Midwest, going down to Florida, swimming in a pool for a little bit, hey, that might be kind of a fun, relaxing, non-demanding type of activity that might yield some positive days following it in terms of behavior problems, new environment, lots of reinforcers. But in terms of the active treatment, it's not there. As you see here on this next image, a picture of a grilled cheese sandwich. Actually, 2 different grilled cheese sandwiches. The one on the left there, you can see, if you just squint your eyes just a little bit, an image of Jesus on the grilled cheese sandwich. And then on the right-hand side, maybe an image of Marilyn Monroe. Now, the Jesus grilled cheese sandwich there sold on eBay for over $1 million and is on display at a casino in Las Vegas. Now, I don't know about you and what your religious beliefs are, but I have a hard time thinking that Jesus has enough time to imprint himself on a grilled cheese sandwich. Now, why do we see it there? Or is it really just a grilled cheese sandwich? Well, what happens with us as humans is we try to find patterns where there's noise. And we do it all the time, where we look for reasons and explanations for things when we can't seem to find an answer easily. And so our eyes trick us, our minds trick us. And when those tricks come at a cost of both, number one, moving towards more scientific treatment, and number two, costing us time that could be used for better interventions, we run the risk of actually not doing all we can for the people that we care for. Next slide. This idea of correlation versus causation is something very important to consider. And while everyone has ideas about what causes behavior problems, what causes, disabilities, the truth is that we have to stick to science and not the hype, because by doing so, we'll be better prepared to treat the individuals that we need to. This slide here, you can see, shows a very perfect correlation between the rise in organic food sales in our country over this period of time and the rise in the prevalence of autism. So you can see here that while these things are correlated, many people might make the leap towards causation and then conclude that therefore there must be a cause of organic foods on autism. And it's really not there. There's correlations between rising prevalence and cell phone usage, rising prevalence and, electric cars, and the correlations go on, and it's easy for people to get kind of, caught by these kind of demonstrations or these kind of visualizations. But the truth is, where we're going to find the solutions is going to be in science. And science isn't fun, and science isn't going to fix it in 1 week. But honestly, in the long run, it's like an investment in your financial security during retirement. It's something you got to work on every day, just like that diet, just like that exercise. We kind of know in the back of our mind this is probably what we need to do. We want to chase after the quick fixes, but it's not going to happen. So the scientific approach that I encourage you all to follow, that we're going to talk about today, involves these various dimensions. Number one is that it needs to be child-specific, meaning that any intervention that's chosen needs to be individualized to the person that you're working with. And while behavior may be different across different people, the intervention might need to be different. If I have 2 individuals with work refusal or 2 individuals with, aggressive behavior, do you know what kind of intervention I'm going to do? I don't know. I have no idea, because I need to understand what surrounds those behaviors and what is provoking them as well as what is sustaining them. And those are going to be child-specific decisions, so each case needs to be dealt with individually. The second point here is it needs to be non-aversive. We cannot afford to make the mistakes of shortcutting interventions. Sure, you could definitely make things so aversive that you'll never get a behavior problem. I have a kid that doesn't want to go to bed at night, and so I could make it really aversive for her and just say, hey, you know what? At 10 o'clock, I'm killing the power to the house, and there's going to be no more internet, no more TV, no more cell phone, and that might maybe be mean enough that it'll get her to go to bed, but at the same time, it's not practical, it's really not ethical, and it's really not enjoyable for the person that you're working with. And so there are a lot of different ways that we can go about with positive interventions that can have also an intrinsic residual effect on people, so that they actually want to do the right thing because it makes them feel good. And if we can the conditions that get them to this point, not only have we changed the problem, we've also hopefully changed the trajectory of how they see themselves in the world. The next one is the functional cause, and this kind of speaks to the earlier point that I make about being child-specific. Everybody's got a reason for the things they do, and it's about us turning into somewhat of a behavioral detective to try to figure out what is actually causing that behavior, and then by doing so, we'll be better equipped to deliver an effective intervention that's based on that specific cause. Next slide. In the past, everybody did one-size-fits-all interventions. Those of you that have been in school buildings over the last decade, you've seen charts like the one on the left-hand side of this image here, where kids might start off as doing okay on green, and they get little clips that go up and down based on their behavior. And supposedly, maybe people care about moving up and down, but there's always going to be some kids that could care less. And the relative decision-making as to who goes up and down is often arbitrary and left in the eyes of the teacher, who's sometimes attending or not attending to behavior. Another point here is that historically we would do things like, put kids in timeout, that we would, in this example, we see a child standing in the corner of the room with one arm up above their head. That doesn't seem too fun. I remember back when I got in trouble in school, I told you I had behavior problems. I remember they made me write the Bible in the hallway. But, for me, that was from the eyes of the teachers, that was punitive. But for me, when it was minus 20 degrees outside in Milwaukee during the winter time, and we, for some reason, still needed to go out to recess, I had those nuns fooled, and I actually was disappointed to have to miss recess. So the truth is that sometimes what we think is punitive might actually be reinforcing to people. And so going in that direction is just really going to have limitations. And historically, it's shown to be such. And then finally, we had this belief that children are just supposed to behave because that's what children do, like it was somehow a born innate quality. And we just needed to straighten the child out, and then finally they would see the light of how they were supposed to behave. On the right side of this slide here, you see a variety of behaviors and their consequences, and they all seem to yield the same consequence, which is timeout. Now again, timeout could be punitive. It could also be reinforcing to people too that want to get away from whatever environment you have them in. So again, this one size fits all and this kind of focus on kind of generic interventions is never going to work in the long run. Next slide. So the first step we have to do is figure out what actually is the reason behind the things that we do. I don't know about you, but sometimes I eat too much. As we kind of conclude here today and everybody goes off on their lunch hour, or maybe they're doing it right now, got a bad feeling that many of us are going to regret the bad food choices that we made. I'm coming to you right now from the parking lot of a McDonald's that I just ate lunch at. And what in the heck am I going to about that about 3 hours from now? That it was a bad life choice. But why did I do it? Am I just destined for disaster? Or are there certain causes that provoked me into this maladaptive pattern of eating? Odds are some of you guys have been daydreaming during this presentation. I myself am daydreaming about a better lunch tomorrow. Maybe you're surfing the internet right now while you're listening to me, getting CEUs, shopping for happiness at Amazon. Why did we all watch The Tiger King last spring? What are the reasons why we do the things we do? And is there a finite number of these types of causes? And if there are, and we can figure it out, there might just be a finite number of directions that we can go in for intervention. And if that's the case, I believe we can solve many of the problems of the children that we care for, and maybe some of the problems that are going on with the people that we live with at home. So why do these individuals behave the way they do? Why did I end up doing all of these things on this slide, eating too much, daydreaming, and watching The Tiger King? Well, the answers lie ahead. And now let me turn it over to John, who will continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. So kind of going along that train of thoughts, there has been a lot of myth on why people behave, why we do what we do, and that kind of also extends to the children that we're working with. Well, someone may say that behavior concerns are the child's fault. The child are not properly, quote-unquote, educated or not properly, quote-unquote, raised. If only they've been raised differently, if only they know their manners, they would behave differently. If only that the doctor will change the medication so the behavior problem will go away. So all these assumptions reinforce the idea that we as educators or as clinicians or as the person who provides care for these individuals have no role in creating the behavior concern you run into. It is what it is. We're here to quote unquote fix a problem that already exists. What am I going to do? But reality is we are all product of our environment. We behave in ways because we are reactive to what's going around, like around us all the time. Maladaptive behaviors are triggered by the environment. There's a Popeye right next to my building, and each time I open the window, I can smell the really delicious fried chicken coming through it. And that really makes me crave a chicken sandwich every night before I go to bed. And the people that we're working with, they do not cause maladaptive behavior. And we can only address the behavior concern by addressing environment. Well, maybe I should just close the window before every night. Or maybe I should just post a sign on my window to remind me that I kind of value my health and should really stay away from the junk food. And again, when we tackle these behavior concerns, lots of times that we fall into the trap of thinking, I need to change their mind so that they decide that they're not behaving a certain way. But reality is that rarely happens. I mean, if I smell the fried chicken coming through from my window, I will always crave for it, although I know, yeah, it's bad for me. No, it's going to cause obesity. It's going to really do some damage to my body in the long term, but I still want to go downstairs and buy one every night. So instead of really trying to persuade the other individual or trying to change how they think, really what we should focus on is on why the behavior happens or the function of the behavior. So think of functions of behavior as a destination, okay? We want to get somewhere. And there might be different routes to go where we need to go. But as long as you still want to go to that place, if you block one road, I'll always just go find another one. So as long as the cause of the function of behavior does not go away, the behavior will always happen. So usually, or in general speaking, we can put behavior in one of these four baskets: attention, sensory, escape, and tangible. So sometimes we engage in a certain behavior because we crave attention from other people. Well, anyone who has a child knows that before the child can talk, they cry to get attention. They cry to get what they want. And that can be really reinforcing for them. And sometimes we engage in behavior to get tangible items. Well, why rush down the building every night before I go to bed? Well, I want that chicken sandwich. I want to get something, right? And sometimes we also engage in behavior to escape from something that we really don't like, from aversive stimuli. So for example, Dr. Dixon mentioned earlier that, well, although he doesn't get access to recess, but he's really escaping from the cold winter in Milwaukee that's minus 20 degrees outside. So sometimes we engage in behavior to escape from something that we don't want. And sometimes we engage in self-stimulatory behavior or for sensory. So you might see a baby sucking their finger. You may see me biting my pen right now as I'm talking. So these are the four kind of general baskets that we can categorize why we engage in a certain behavior. And these functional approach provide a unique framework for us to make sense of why certain behavior is happening. I apologize for my cat. She's a little wild right now. So when we use these functional approach to understand why a behavior happens, it's really important to look at these, what we call the A, B, and C's of behavior. So A is antecedent, or what happens before the behavior. It sets the occasion for it. So for example, my really bad bedtime routine of Popeye chicken sandwiches would be set by the smell of fried chicken coming through my window. And then I would engage in a behavior, which would be rushing downstairs and trying to buy one. And the consequence of that behavior would be, well, I now get my chicken sandwich. And then maybe 2 hours later, I start to feel bad about myself. So you can see these A, B, and C's provide a framework of making sense of, okay, what is triggering the behavior? What did I do? And what's the consequence that follows after? And this consequence is then linked back to the four functions of behavior that I mentioned here. So for example, in my Popeye sandwich example, the function would be to get access to tangible items, right? And in the example you can see on the screen, if I have a headache, that's going to set the occasion for me to take a Tylenol. And once I take a Tylenol, the pain is gone. So you can see that this particular behavior could be that I want to escape from the painful headache I'm feeling, or could be a sensory relief. So you can see by analyzing behavior using this ABxcs, we can understand why a behavior happens. And once we understand why behavior happens, then maybe I can change the antecedent or change the environment or change the consequence a little bit so that I can nudge the behavior towards a quote-unquote right direction. So when we try to use these A, B, and C's to make sense of behavior, there are some general steps that we can follow. So before we get started with anything, it's really important to first come up with a definition of the behavior. How is the behavior seen by others? A definition that everyone in the environment can agree upon. And then we would want to describe the occasions that kind of set off the event. We want to pay attention to what usually happens before the behavior, but also we want to understand what usually doesn't happen before the behavior. Well, usually what occasion would never trigger the behavior. So for example, if I'm on the phone call with a friend, or if I'm on a phone call with my parents, or if I just step on the weight scale and see how heavy I am, maybe for that night, I'm not going to go downstairs and buy a Popeye chicken sandwich. So you want to see what things in the environment already exist that kind of have some of the controlling functions on the behavior. And then we want to take a look at what's the typical outcome of the behavior. What happened afterwards? What is gained after the behavior, or what is taken away after the behavior? And then we want to think about sometimes what happens that will make the behavior worse. And then think about, okay, now I have this environmental factors in my mind, what happens before, what happens after, and then what change I can do to have a really quick and positive impact on the behavior concern that I have. So there are three major ways to gather those information on environmental variables that I just mentioned earlier, through survey, direct observation, and experimental analysis. So there's a wealth of different surveys on behavior that are really easy and quick to use, either as a caregiver, as a clinician, or as a school teacher. So just to name a few, there's the motivation assessment scale, questions about behavior function, or a wealth of different open-ended functional assessment interviews. And again, you can easily find these on the internet. There's many clinical resources available. So with these surveys, I am using a structured or semi-structured format, interacting with the caregivers of the individual to collect some background information on what the behavior concern is, what usually happens before it, what does the behavior look like, and what usually happens after the behavior. But now keep in mind, although these individuals interact with the child that we work with quite often, their information is always second-handed. We also want to spend the time with the child and directly observe their behavior in their natural environment. And that comes the second piece of how to collect these data, which is by direct observation of behavior. So here what you see on the screen is a common tool that you can use in your practice, which kind of categorize the things that might happen in the environment that might be of interest to you based on antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So go back to step A, B, and C. And you can see there are a lot of potential variables that might happen, and you can simply place a check mark on it. And once you collect this behavior for a few days and across different settings, then you have an idea of noticing, oh, okay, the behavior is rushing downstairs and get a Popeye chicken sandwich. What usually happened before? It's at nighttime, the window's open, I got nothing else to do. And what happens after the behavior? I got a chicken sandwich, I feel bad about myself, question my life choices, etc. So you can see using these A, B, and C's in this format, it's an easier way to gather that information from the environment. And then the last way to get the data is through experimental analysis, is that I'm going to intentionally contrive a situation where I can test whether or not something is indeed a function of the behavior. So for example, I have a cousin, he's 3 years old right now, and every time he goes to the supermarket, he always wants a lollipop. And my grandma usually doesn't want to give him a lollipop, but once he starts to cry and throw a tantrum, she would just give him the lollipop. And so based on that observation that happens 10 times, 20 times, I may have the assumption that, okay, my cousin might be engaging in this tantrum behavior for the purpose of obtaining that lollipop. So what I can do to test this hypothesis is that I can contrive a situation where each time my cousin engaged in the tantrum behavior, which is throwing a tantrum, I would immediately give him a lollipop. And then I will take it away. And if he engaged the behavior again, I will give him a lollipop again. So if he is indeed engaging the behavior for the purpose of accessing that lollipop, we would anticipate to see a spike of behavior because he can keep engaging the behavior to get what he wants. So we are constantly reinforcing it. But in a different situation, let's say I can also suspect that my cousin might engage in throwing a tantrum for the purpose of getting the attention that my grandma is giving him. So to test that, I can contrive a situation where each time he throws a tantrum, my grandma would immediately provide attention and then withdraw attention. And if he throws a tantrum again, she will provide attention again. But when that repeats a few times, if I observe that the behavior doesn't increase drastically, then chances are that my cousin doesn't really care about the attention that is following the tantrum that he just threw. So when that happens, that's providing evidence for me that it's more likely that my brother is indeed engaging in this tantrum behavior for the purpose of getting access to a lollipop, not for the purpose of getting access to all the attention that my grandma is giving her. So these three ways of gathering information really is a kind of like individual components of how we should make sense of the behavior in a contextual way. We want to understand what environment that causes behavior and what environmental changes that we can implement that can address the behavior concern that we have. So let's say, for example, if I'm working with a child, there is no demand for the entire day, and there's abundant interaction between an adult and a child or a child and his peers, and there's a buffet that reinforces all the toys he wants, all the preferred activities he has access to, and there's nothing but recess. If any of these sorts of events, or even fractions of it, can reduce the maladaptive behavior, then essentially you are now informed of how you can effectively address these behavior concerns. And if really nothing you can do that can reduce behavior challenges, maybe you try something over and over again, but it doesn't work, or if you try the same behavior plan for a month and you really don't see a change in behavior decreasing, then really that's a sign for you to know that whatever you're doing, whatever hypothesis that we've come up with at this point might not be really what's going on. So we might need to go back to the drawing board to see what we need to do. So after we have a good handling of what the function behavior is, then the next thing is, how can we get the same outcome without engaging the behavior that is somewhat inappropriate, right? Because the function of behavior doesn't go away. I'm always going to love a Popeye chicken sandwich. Nothing you can do that can change that. I just like it. But what else I can do so that I can still get access to it, but the means through which I access it is now appropriate? Well, in my example, maybe I should just get the chicken sandwich for dinner instead of as a after dinner before bedtime snack, right? And the examples you see on the screen are just some things that you might see happening in the school that you work with, or you might see with the population that you see. So let's say if I get my peers laugh at me for making noise, well, maybe that I engage the behavior for the purpose of getting attention. And what's something else that I can appropriately obtain attention from my peers? Well, maybe me as a teacher, I can call on this individual, and at the end of each lesson, at the beginning of each lesson, I can ask him to tell a joke to the class so that he can get attention appropriately. So you will see this type of paradigm happening over and over again when it comes to decreasing maladaptive behavior. So we have the setting event or the antecedent, and the old way, quote unquote, of behaving would be I would engage the problem behavior and I would get access to the maintaining consequence. tangible, attention, escape, sensory, etc. And I have an alternative approach, which is I have the same setting event, I have the same antecedent, but I would engage in the alternative behavior to get access to the maintaining consequence, while at the same time, I will be blocking the problem behavior. So it's almost like my old way to get into my destination now no longer work. I block the road, you need to find a different path, and let me show you a appropriate path so that you can get the same thing you want without engaging in maladaptive behavior. So these finding the functional equivalent replacement of maladaptive behavior is really the key or the menu for success when we address behavior challenges. So for example, if the functional behavior is to maintain attention, well, maybe we can increase the one-on-one time with the staff so that the child gets abundant attention. Or maybe we want to catch them when they are in quote-unquote behaving good and provide abundant praise when they are on task. Just what usually happens in a classroom is that we only provide attention when the child is acting out. And if the purpose of the behavior is to getting attention at the first place, then we kind of fall right into the trap, like those nuns, right? They thought that they are punishing Dr. Dixon by not giving him recess, but in reality, he just wants to escape from the cold winter outside. And again, the same paradigm applies for tangible and sensory, so that we want to find a functional equivalent so that we can get the same result, but via different route. So now with that said, let me turn to Jesse, who will talk more about social-emotional well-being and how we can address challenging behaviors by mindfulness practices. Jesse?
Perfect. Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. So I'm going to kind of wrap up our conversation today by talking a little bit more about kind of these more complex behaviors that we often see with, ourselves and individuals that we might be working with that don't always have, a clear, ABC, or maybe things get a little bit more complex because, language happens and life things happen. And that's where, this kind of mindfulness approach comes in. And we use it often to teach or promote social and emotional well-being. And now this is a skill, at least I know for myself, that I think everybody can kind of benefit from, especially in the middle of a pandemic and, especially if you don't like the snow like I don't, and maybe your car got stuck today. Practicing these skills kind of helps everybody out, not just the individuals that we work with. And we live in a culture right now that really embraces symptom elimination. Like John touched on when we first started this conversation, that, many parents may want doctors to up medication or look for a different meaning, just a quick, simple fix to whatever is going on. And that's not necessarily, how these things work. They take time. And rather than focusing on symptom elimination, getting rid of the hard stuff, the heavy stuff, the bad stuff, we can practice this acceptance or this mindfulness and acceptance approach instead. And shockingly, it is a very successful intervention, and it does have its roots in science, which is especially beneficial. So, next slide, please. So I'm sure everybody has heard of mindfulness at one point or another. It's on all the magazines. It's in a lot of schools now. It's kind of a hot thing at this point. So we'll go over it very briefly about what it is and why it's, useful and beneficial. But when we're talking about mindfulness, it's being aware of and observing what is going on around you in the present moment without judgment. So I know often when we think of mindfulness, we think of meditation and clearing our mind and just being absolutely still and quiet and kind of at peace. However, when we're using mindfulness, especially when addressing behaviors, it's really simply just being aware of what's going on. How often, like Dr. Dixon spoke about at the very beginning, are we attending a webinar but thinking about our lunch later on, or thinking about all the work we have to do after we log off? Where is our mind? Where does it wander? And rather than, trying to force ourselves not to do that or trying to, have this conversation with ourselves. It's just simply noticing when our mind wanders and allowing, those thoughts to be there, those feelings to be there when they come, and to make, more values-based, meaningful decisions based on where we are. And this type of intervention targets acceptance. We also work a lot on self-management skills, so responding to our emotions and doing what's important to us regardless of what we're thinking or feeling. We also really try, and work on value-based goal setting. And this is something, too, that's especially, important for the adolescents or young adults that we're working with, is teaching them, these interdependent skills of, determining what's important to them and then helping them come up with ways to get closer to those values or do what's important to them as they, navigate their life. Of course, mindfulness also touches a lot on present moment awareness skills, as well as flexible behavior, perspective taking skills. And that's really important too because, it's very easy to, put ourselves in relation to other people, other things, the things going on around us, and kind of lose sight of what's important and what's right in front of us. Next slide, please. And like I said, there's a lot of hype around mindfulness, especially right now. And there's a reason for such. So mindfulness, and a lot of studies have shown these things, mindfulness helps improve sleep, decrease anxiety, it helps improve your mood. We've also, not us, but there's been a lot of research showing that it actually improves kind of the way the brain works. So there's more prefrontal cortex activation. It improves immune responses, which is a good thing right now during the pandemic. It improves concentration. If you're more aware of what's going on around you, you're probably more able to take in what's going on, remember those things, focus on those details and things like that. It is also really good for your overall health, from all of these things. And I know one thing that really helps me, with the mindfulness is better memory. I'm, someone who typically forgets things and kind of rushes from one thing to another. But to be able to slow down and, again, really just focus on what's going on around you, being in the present moment here now, helps you take those things in. Additionally, there's kind of some other, life things that it helps out with. It allows us to enjoy what's going on in front of us. Maybe you're at a birthday with your family, but you're thinking about what's going on, with your work or with your school stuff, that maybe you're not able to enjoy that birthday party as much as you would like to. It allows you to appreciate things a little bit more if you're able to notice them. Oftentimes, if we're walking outside or doing something, it might just be part of our regular day-to-day experience. But if we're able, again, to just really notice what's going on around us, what we're experiencing, we might have a little bit more appreciation for that experience. Additionally, as much as we think about the past and the future, we can't really change them. I've tried all the things I can. Unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand, but really, the more we're worrying about what might happen or what could happen, or just focusing so much on what has happened or what you did do or didn't do, that pattern of thinking won't actually change those things. However, if we're able to focus on the right here, right now, we can choose how we engage in, or we can choose which behaviors we engage in to get to the things that are important to us and keep moving forward. And also, we really miss out on a lot of things when we're not in the present. So again, maybe you signed up for this webinar because you were really excited to learn about how to reduce challenging behaviors and learn about mindfulness. But if, we're so consumed with, I know tax season is coming up, worrying about our taxes and all these other things that life has thrown at us, we're maybe not taking in as much as we might want to. So again, being more mindful of where we are, what we're doing, and those sorts of things is really, really beneficial. Next slide, please. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do this, and we won't go too in-depth into these things, But when we're working on mindfulness, especially with those that we're serving, we often touch on these 6 different processes. And those include things, like I said, being present, acceptance, flexible perspective taking, and like I touched on, we really also focus a lot on values and commitment to those values. So that's that goal setting, discovering what's important to us, and then figuring out ways to get closer to those things. So we really incorporate all these kind of 6 different processes within our practice. Next slide, please. And, this is, like I said, this is very rooted in science. There's a lot of evidence to support these things and these processes. And it can be, really more elaborate, and we'll kind of show that in just a minute here. But it can also be pretty simple. So just changing the way that we, talk to our kids or our students or whoever we're working with. Rather than saying things like, oh, we can't always get what we want, we might say things like, let's just accept that things are different than what we wanted, and let's try our best to move forward. How often do, friends trying to comfort you say like, oh, I'm so sorry, like, just cheer up, it'll get better. And you're like, well, that doesn't change how I feel. But if we're able to, just change the way we interact with those that we're working with, or our friends and our families and ourselves, we can really kind of change, how we look at these thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Because we can't necessarily change them as what they are, but we can change how we interact with them and how they, ultimately affect our lives and our well-being. So next slide, please. And here's kind of some other ways that we, use these strategies. So we use them to teach behavior change in small goals or steps. So, kind of helping individuals see, again, what's important to them and how they can get there. So instead of saying things like, hey, you know what, you need to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G before you go to recess, that might be too much. I know for me, sometimes I need to go one at a time before I think about the next 6 things I do because it's too overwhelming. But if we say things like, we may need to do a lot of stuff today, but let's start at A and then we'll move on to B, and really kind of breaking it up and teaching that skill of moving forward in tiny steps. We also might we're going to teach the positive self. So instead of saying things like, oh, you're not dumb, don't say that, don't think that, we're going to essentially validate that they're having that feeling, but also acknowledging that it's a feeling and it's a thought. So saying things like dumb is just a word, we might think that about ourselves, but, we're Bobby, or you're Bobby, and you can finish this worksheet. And that's just a thought that you're having, and keep kind of moving forward to do what's important to you. So that's some ways that we can help, our students or our clients or our children that we're working with in that way. And there's a variety of different ways that we can do this. Next slide, please. Perfect. So there's many different curriculums that we can use to teach these skills, to promote these skills. One of which is the AIM curriculum, which Dr. Dixon authored. But there's numerous different resources out there for teaching mindfulness, teaching acceptance, perspective taking, all those sorts of things. And this is one that is rooted within behavioral analysis and takes a functional approach. So we, use what John went over while also integrating mindfulness practices. And if you go to the next slide, we can kind of briefly go through an example of that. So this is what kind of a lesson would look like. So they're pretty easy to implement, pretty basic to go through. However, you can really tailor how in-depth you go with it, how, detailed you go with your discussion based on the target and your student or your learner's needs. So for example, we can, try this out all together now. So, just pretend we're doing this as a group here. But here's the lesson of the ice cream sundae. So love it or hate it, an ice cream sundae is a fascinating, delicious creation. And it might just start with a single scoop of ice cream, but it ends with sprinkles, cherries, hot fudge, and a little whipped cream on top. And the wide variety of topping choices assures that most people can probably find some type of combination that will taste really good. I don't know about you, but I love a banana split. That's my favorite with some peanuts on top. But that might not be your favorite. Sometimes the combination of ingredients might not be perfect. Life has many, many different events, and the perfect combination might not always be possible. But we can accept that not everything is going to have a cherry on top. So we then would move on to, what's your favorite type of sundae? If you don't like ice cream, what would be a different, dessert that you would like? And we would talk about an event within your own life that was maybe ruined by one bad topping. And, that was sprinkled on top of your sundae. But, what are some alternative things that you can do to still enjoy that dessert, that really delicious ice cream sundae? So that's kind of an example of a lesson that we might want to run through. And, depending on who you're working with and, your learners, your audience, you can make it really hands-on with these activities too, whether it be, drawing or creating an ice cream sundae, maybe actually making an ice cream sundae to really make it interactive and fun. But these are some of the ways that we can promote mindfulness within those that we're working with, to really kind of focus on these skills related to social and emotional well-being. So that brings us about to the end, and I think leaves us about 5 minutes or so for some questions.
Thank you so much to our presenters, Dr. Dixon, John, and Jesse. That was a really informative presentation. We are going to be taking questions, and I'll read them out to you. One of the questions that we have is, if we as professionals would like to incorporate teaching our patients about mindfulness, do you recommend any trainings to prepare us to be successful in providing the education?
Yes, so that is a great question. So I think there are lots of journals and articles that are available here that can be a really great reference point. So there's a journal called Mindfulness. It has lots of user-friendly materials and also practical guides you can use. And also we will be conducting more in-depth mindfulness trainings in terms of geared more towards practitioners and how we can use it in clinical setting. So stay tuned, and we can cover that a little bit more in detail in the future.
Great, thank you. Someone was interested in the forms that you shared earlier, and they want to know if you would be able to share them with the attendees today.
Yeah, John, could you just cut and paste the hyperlinks to those, the QAVF and those functions?
Sure.
Those are all available. You can easily find those free online through Google, but John will share some hyperlinks in the chat box.
Wonderful. Thank you. One of the other questions we have is, what are some things to watch out for when addressing behavioral changes?
I guess one of the things to look out for would be expecting success immediately, and when you don't get it, to be worried that you've done something wrong, or that this thing that we've been talking about today doesn't work. This stuff works, but it oftentimes works in the long run, not the short run. And if you sometimes you hear the phrase, "Oh, it's going to get worse before it gets better." And, honestly, there sometimes is truth to that. Not always, but there is sometimes where, now that you've kind of figured out what the function is, and now you're kind of holding back those consequences and only allowing them to show up for, more positive behavior, you might get some resistance. Hey, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it your way. So I guess be ready for some of that stuff. Gently step into these interventions. Try some of this out on the more, not so extreme, non-threatening behaviors first. Get it, and then as you get a little bit better with your detective work and your intervention technique, you can step into those more difficult situations.
Great, thank you for answering that. Who can practice and benefit from mindfulness is another question we have.
I believe everybody can do so. Everybody has an opportunity to benefit from mindfulness, whether it be the clients or even ourselves.
Wonderful. Okay. One of the questions is, I've never implemented mindfulness before. Where should I start?
I think you could start with a little bit of self attempts. Jesse, would you like to take that and talk a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Dixon on that one. I think, just beginning to practice it yourself is incredibly beneficial, and just learning, you got to practice what you preach a little bit, I think. So, it might be a little tricky to recommend mindfulness for those you're working with if you're not actually doing it and kind of noticing the benefits in your own life. And I think, practicing it yourself will kind of show you that, there's certain things that'll work and there's certain things that you maybe won't work for you. I know for myself, I'm kind of a busybody and I can't sit still for very long and be mindful and do those things. So, I incorporate mindfulness in a little bit more, active way. And I think, just trying different things out, seeing what's helpful before, you kind of start doing it with others can be, very informative and a good place to start.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for attending the webinar today, and thank you to our presenters. Our next webinar is on February 10th. It's Healthy Sexuality, Empowering Self-Advocates on Sex, and it is at noon. Thank you so much.